prayer. It's on the second slide. These are just some words from St. John Paul II, but you can see it there for if you want to, but I'd suggest just close your eyes for a moment. These are beautiful words, and it'd be great to be able to sort of allow them to speak into you, into your heart, listen to them from the heart, just to set the scene. St. John Paul says, "It is Jesus that you seek when you dream of happiness. He is waiting for you when nothing else you find satisfies you. He is the beauty to which you are so attracted. It is he who provoked you with that thirst for fullness that will not let you settle for compromise. It is he who urges you to shed the masks of a false life. It is he who reads in your heart your most genuine choices, the choices that others try to stifle. It is Jesus who stirs in you the desire to do something great with your lives, the will to follow an ideal, the refusal to allow yourselves to be ground down by mediocrity, the courage to commit yourselves. Lord, we entrust ourselves to you this evening. We ask that your grace would be at work within our hearts now and during this time. To open us, to give us a courage to soften our hearts, to hear your call, to hear your voice, to recognise our thirst for you. To know ourselves and know your call more deeply. Amen. That's from John Paul. Going back many years, my friend Lizzie at school, when we were about 17, had a profound moment one day in the sixth form common room. I don't know what the context was now, but Lizzie had a moment where she suddenly announced, "We only have this one life to live. There is no dress rehearsal," she said. And I think we're all like, wow, Lizzie, gosh, that's quite a message for us. And I think in a way, actually, we are able to live life a little bit like that, almost in the wings of a play. You know, we sort of stay in the wings off stage. And never quite take up our role in life. It's possible to sort of sit on the sidelines almost, and maybe think at some point I'll enter on the stage and I'll play my part. But we wait and then we hesitate, and then maybe the stage fright gets us, and we never really begin. We never really begin our life. And I think there's a real tragedy in that, because actually I think many of us can do it, and a lot of Christians can do it as well. Even though we've been told that our lives have meaning and our lives have purpose, even if we've heard talks where we've been told that we have a calling, nonetheless still we can somehow not quite allow that message really to touch into the core of us. And so life is a little bit more like sleepwalking, perhaps, than really being awake and playing our part. So it's a sadness. I think there's a sadness that we can be unaware that our life has specific meaning, that God really does have a personal plan for us, and that he's created us unique for a purpose. So what I'd say is, over these weeks that we're exploring this question of calling, if you go away from if you go away from the series with any take-home message, don't go away with the message that God is calling. I know that's the title of the series, but don't go away with the message that God is calling. Go away with the message that God is calling you. That God is calling you. He's not in the room. Oh,
No, he's gone. He's gone for confession.
You missed his moment. Not entirely lost. That God is calling you. I love this photo. Very frantic. Yeah, so God is calling you, not just Philippe and Francis, although Philippe may never know now that you can let him know when he comes back. But really to actually let that message reverberate, let that truth reverberate deep into our beings, because it has enormous consequences for our lives, and how we can actually live this one life that we have, with great joy and great meaning. Going a few years ahead from 17 in sixth form, when I was a student at 22, I read somewhere, I have no idea where I read this, but it really radically altered my understanding of life. I read that the God we believe in as Christians is a God who speaks. And that this God who speaks is speaking personally to me. And that actually this speaking, this addressing me personally, means he's actually speaking me into life. He's speaking me into being. That by addressing me, he is holding me in existence. And whoever this author was, they said, actually, if God were to cease to speak to you, or to you, whoever the you is, if God was to cease to speak to you, you would simply and instantaneously cease to exist. So I'm going to say more about that a little bit later. So I just want to put a bit of a framework around the course that we're exploring, and there are a number of different dimensions to how we can understand vocation or calling, and I find these four really helpful. And the first one, that we're made in God's image, that we're called to love, is like the foundation layer. Okay, we can call this the human vocation. This is your vocation simply by virtue of being a human being. You are called to love because you're made in God's image. That's the foundation of everything. And then the next dimension is that you're baptized into Christ. You're called to holiness, which is the baptismal vocation. That's what the wonderful Father Dave King's going to talk about next week, so don't miss that. And then there's the context in which this love and holiness expresses itself for many people, a state of life. So whether that's being married, or a priest, or a religious, or whether it's a dedicated single life, it's a context for that giving of oneself in love. And then there's your mission, the doing part, what you do in the world. And perhaps often we think about that dimension the most. We think, well, I'm going to be a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer, or I'm going to work in the civil service, or I want to go overseas and do some mission work, or I'm doing certain works of service in my parish or whatever. But actually, the first dimension is the most important. That's what we're going to talk about a bit this evening. And I know Alice quoted this last week. This is like a linchpin quote. It's so useful to kind of return to this again and again. That we as human beings find ourselves in a sincere gift of ourselves. Man finds himself in a sincere gift of himself. So this foundation of vocation, the human vocation, it's, as I say, foundational. Go back a few slides. Philippe, I'm so sorry, you missed your moment.
Oh!
He's calling you. He's calling you.
Great.
Oh, yeah.
That's so cool.
It was such a long moment to go to confession.
That's great.
He's also calling Francis.
I just can't believe I look like that.
Dang it.
It's great. I almost chose a photo of you in a kill, but but then that was such a great photo. Yeah, so this idea of the human vocation. John Paul II, I love St. John Paul II, I just love him, he's marvellous. He talked about the grandeur of the human vocation. I love that word, the grandeur of the human vocation. And that's that call to pour out our lives in love, which leads us to enter into communion with God and communion with others. And this love, this expressing of our humanity, the gift of ourselves, John Paul II, he called this the high standard of ordinary Christian living. So we maybe sometimes we like to put things in boxes, and we say there's those heroic people who live heroic lives, and we'll call them saints or whatever, and then we sort of go, but then there's just little me. But John Paul II was really clear that actually, and I'm sure Dave will say more about this next week, but really clear that actually holiness and greatness is the calling of every human being. So each one of us is called to greatness, and that calling is because you've been made in the image and likeness of a God who is great. For you to be mediocre, okay? Because God is not mediocre. So God can't make mediocre people in his image and likeness. You've been made for love. You've been made for this giving of yourself, which is greatness. And that's this wonderful quote from St. Catherine of Siena that's kind of a bit of a motto for our series. If you are who you are made to be, you will set the world on fire. And I was once giving this talk to a group of students in London, and I used this quote, and one delightful chap, he was an absolute sweetie, medical student who I was working with, and but he was very adamant. He said, no, that's not me. That's not my vocation. I'm not called to set the world on fire. I thought, oh, this is intriguing. And I think he just misunderstood completely, because he felt that it wasn't his personality to be flamboyant or to be, sort of passionate, or to be somebody who was going to sort of, go and rock the world in some way through big gestures. He was a quiet guy. But St. Catherine of Siena is not saying that you have to be St. Catherine of Siena, or that you have to be Mother Teresa, or that you have to be a big personality, or that you have to travel the world. And it's not a personality thing. It's about the fact that God, who is infinite, abundant, awesome, beautiful and powerful, has made you, and has made you to reflect him in the world. So this God who has made you, forms you, he calls you, and then he supplies the power that you need, his love, in order for you to fulfill that calling. So we're going to take a few minutes just to ponder these great words. This is a document called In Verbo Tuo, which was written by the bishops of Europe about vocation, about calling. I think this really expresses something very profound. But it's like any document written by bishops. It's quite intense and wordy. And so it takes a bit of time to kind of unpack it. So I'm going to read it. You can read along with it. Hopefully what's here is the same as there, or it'll be roughly the same. Just see for you, actually try and listen to it deeply, and see for you what words from this echo for you, what stands out for you, what's profound or meaningful or exciting or challenging, or something that you perhaps haven't, you want to take away and dwell on more deeply. So just listen. Just as holiness is for all the baptized in Christ, so there exists a specific vocation for every living person. And just as the first is rooted in baptism, so is the second connected to the simple fact of existing. The vocation is the providential thought of the Creator for his creature, It is his idea plan, like a dream found in God's heart, because the creature is found in his heart. God the Father wants this to be different and specific for each living person. Vocation is the divine invitation to self-realization according to God's image, and is unique, singular, unrepeatable, precisely because this image is inexhaustible. Every creature expresses and is called to express a particular aspect of the thought of God. There he finds his name and his identity. He affirms and ensures his freedom and originality. So just take a moment just to read back over that and just think, for you, what connects, what's profound, what's significant in those words. I think I'm just going to unpack that just a little bit, because there's, as I say, there's so much in there. There's a tremendous sense, I think, of the intimacy of the human vocation. That actually we are known and loved into existence. We are a thought of God. We are found in God's heart. That we are a dream. He desires us. So he's dreamt us up and holds us, every part of our being, every part of our living, in him, in his heart. That wonderful, they've created their own little word there. Unique, singular, unrepeatable. It's great. Unique, singular, unrepeatable. Every person in this room and every person you will ever meet is unique, singular, unrepeatable. That God, in his desire to manifest himself in the world and reflect his own beauty and his own joy in the world, God is like a diamond with infinite facets, and every human life, every human person is one of those facets, and reflects, shines a light into the world, shines some aspect of who God is for the world to see. And only you can reflect that aspect of God in the world. Only you. Nobody else can do it for you. And the world needs that full vision of God, that full manifestation of Christ. So in that sense, I think hopefully we can really see that a part of vocation is a kind of self-realization. Self-realization, not in the way in which maybe that sort of term is sometimes used in the world that we live in our society, where I think there's quite a sense of, we want to be self-made people. We make ourselves and we make our identity. But much more in the sense that we as people, as a person, each one of us is a gift. Who we are, our identity in its deepest sense, is gifted to us by God. And we now have a part to play in cooperating with his grace and that creative action of God as he brings that true self into being. We really come to birth as people. So there is a responsibility to be fully ourselves, to be fully the people that we've been made to be. Thomas Merton said that we must make the choices that enable us to fulfill the deepest capacities of our real selves, to make the choices that enable us to fulfill the deepest capacities of our real selves. So there's a responsibility, a task here. There's a Jesuit called Herbie Alfonso who wrote a book called The Personal Vocation, and that's kind of what we're talking about, that personal dimension. And he really kind of unpacked this whole dimension in this book. And he said that it's the most radical aspect of calling. Much more so than a state of life, like being married or being a priest or being a monk or a nun, because it's about God's, the personal plan or design that you have from God. He called it my God-given uniqueness, my deepest and truest self. It is God's law imprinted on my heart. To put this another way, we could say that God calls us by name. God calls us by name. And when we use the word name in the biblical sense, in the true Christian sense, we don't just mean, the name Philippe or the name Francis. We mean what God means by name. Something much more profound, not literal, but something deeply profound. It's referring to that a source of meaning and identity that's like a secret at the very core of us. So if we're on a journey of discerning our calling, what we're trying to do is we're trying to tune in to hear Jesus Christ call us personally by name. That's the journey. So how do we do this? How can this happen? How can we make this journey of self-discovery and self-realization of our potential in God? Two things. The first is heart-to-heart prayer. And the second is discovering our deepest desire. So heart-to-heart prayer and discovering our deepest desire. When I was 21, I was spending an Easter weekend at Worth Abbey for the Easter Triduum. Worth Abbey, Easter Triduum, great thing to do, by the way. Yeah, if you're not doing anything this Easter, Easter Triduum Worth, amazing experience, completely life-changing. At that stage of my life, age 21, at the Easter Triduum at Worth, I genuinely was oblivious to a sense of a personal interaction with God. I think at that point it wasn't obvious to me that God existed. I would say I'm more of a natural agnostic or atheist than a natural Christian or theist. So it wasn't obvious to me that God existed. It definitely wasn't obvious to me that God was involved in my life. And I definitely had no sense of God being personally in communication with me or interested in me. That just wasn't there. So I would say I was sleepwalking through life at this point. Maybe a little bit like that Samaritan woman before she meets Jesus. I was not fully awake to life yet. I'd say my life was kind of in black and white, not in colour yet. I was in the wings. I didn't have a sense of life having a profound meaning or purpose. I'm just going to read the words. Just close your eyes and listen to this, because it's such a beautiful psalm, and it speaks of intimacy. So listen carefully to it. O Lord, you search me and you know me. You know my resting and my rising. You discern my purpose from afar. You mark when I walk or lie down. All my ways lie open to you. Before ever a word is on my tongue, you know it, O Lord, through and through. Behind and before you besiege me, your hand ever laid upon me. Too wonderful for me this knowledge, too high beyond my reach. Oh, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your face? If I climb the heavens, you are there. If I lie in the grave, you are if I say, let the darkness hide me, and the light around me be night, even darkness is not dark for you, and the night is as clear as the day. For it was you who created my being, knit me together in my mother's womb. I thank you for the wonder of my being, for the wonders of all your creation. That song that weekend really cut me to the heart, and it spoke to me of a God who isn't distant or disinterested, who doesn't treat me as one in the crowd, that I'm not anonymous for him, that God in fact is intimately present and engaged. This God sees me through and through. He knows every part of me, everything about me, everything I ever did, every desire that I have, and that I am transparent to his gaze. And that gaze isn't a gaze of judgment. It's not a gaze that I need to run and hide from and find the darkness to try and cover myself so that I can't be seen. But that gaze is a gaze of love, of acceptance, a tender look. A God who's formed me in the womb, a God whose hand is ever laid upon me, a God who's touching me. I am touched by God. And it was that word really that was part of a process that unfolded of God being able to break through my deafness. Because really until that point I'd been just oblivious, sleepwalking through life and looking for happiness in the wrong places. So it took a bit of silence, a bit of stillness, the softening of my heart and the word of God to allow God to begin to pierce my heart. And from there I started to wake up. And I would say life went from black and white to technicolour, because I was now living in this dialogue with God. Life started to have depth and meaning. I think it might be 2 slides on. Let's have a look. What have we got? Yeah, I'm going to keep going. Next one. Brill. I love this quote from St. Augustine. I'm sorry, I'm giving you lots of quotes this evening because I think, people don't read enough these days, so I'll give you lots of quotes. I'll give you little extracts from great writers. Everyone should read the Confessions of St. Augustine, obviously. But if you don't read the Confessions of St. Augustine, then you should definitely know these beautiful and wonderful words, because this is how he described God's grace breaking into his life after a long struggle. Augustine was a great character. I very, very much look forward to meeting him in heaven, because he was a person full of passion who really, desired life and was looking for it, and really pushing and trying to find it in lots of things, and not always in the most moral ways. And anyway, God finally broke in, and when he did, it was very profound. And he wrote these words about 10 years after his conversion. He said, "Late have I loved you, O beauty, ever ancient, never new." By the way, I'm saying this because I really resonate with these words. I think this describes what happened for me. Yeah. Late have I loved you, O beauty, ever ancient, never new. Late have I loved you. You were within me, but I was outside, and it was there, outside of myself, that I searched for you. In my unloveliness, I plunged into the lovely things which you created. You were with me, but I was not with you. Created things kept me from you. Yet, if they had not been in you, they would not have been at all. You called, you shouted, and you broke through my deafness. You flashed, you shone, and you dispelled my blindness. You breathed your fragrance on me. I drew in breath, and now I pant for you. I have tasted you, now I hunger and thirst for more. You touched me and I burned for your peace. So that sense, if we want to discover who we are and really start to tune in to God speaking to us in intimately in our lives, and really begin to discover that sense in which that utterly unique reflection of God that we've been made to be, then the first thing we have to do is stop searching outside of ourselves, but begin to make this journey inside and into the God who dwells deeply in us, is already there waiting for us and has already found us. It's us that are somewhere else. We're absent from ourselves and from God. And actually, through beginning to carve out some silence and some daily prayer in our lives, we can make a journey where we come to enter into that place with him. Just coming back to that idea of God speaking to us and our existence actually being dependent on this continuous, loving address of God to you and me. One thing that is really helpful for us to realise about this is that actually God hasn't made us, his creation isn't static. He hasn't made us and we're like the finished article and that's that, and then he's taken his creative hands off us. But actually, it's much more that God is constantly creating us and shaping and moulding us. He never stops creating. And that speaking to us is part of how he's calling us into life, into fullness, to become that person he's made us to be. Again, Thomas Merton said, our vocation is not simply to be, but to work together with God in the creation of our own life, our own identity, our own destiny. We need to pray for our own discovery. So there's a dynamic reality. Vocation's not a fixed plan, it's dynamic. But we tap into it through heart speaking to heart, entering into that deep place where God dwells within us. And then just touching on the idea of discovering our deepest desire. When we start to make that interior journey into the heart, into the indwelling of God, where we can begin to tune in to listen to our very, very deepest desires. I don't know if that's a question you've ever asked yourself. What's my deepest desire? I know it wasn't a question that I'd ever asked until I was 22 and went to Worth, and I was looking for a spiritual director, so I met up with Father Luke. And you know, he just thought he'd go for the jugular. First question, what's your deepest desire? Wow, gosh, it's not a question anyone's ever asked me. It's not a question I've ever thought about. But actually, what was really telling for me was that a word came to my mind in that moment, really strongly. It rose up from deep in me. There was a word. There was a deep desire that actually I could name. I could put a word to it. And actually, that's not changed. I would still say the same word now. I might put some other words around it as well. But so to begin to tune in through prayer, to discover that very deepest yearning of the heart. Again, like that woman at the well who thought her thirst was for these men that she was living with. And when she encounters Jesus, she discovers she has a thirst she never knew that she had. And she discovers the person who corresponds to that thirst, who meets that thirst and can satisfy it. And that's the moment. That's the moment that she knows herself, because she's been known by him. He's sown it within us at our conception. When he made us, he placed that deep desire in us. And he alone is the one who can satisfy it. But we do tend to live in a world with quite a lot of illusion, quite a lot of fantasy around, and we're bombarded with sales pitches from every direction that will promise us fulfillment and lead us into kind of illusory places to try and meet those needs. So one of the things that happens for us is that we build up a kind of false self, an understanding of who we are and what we want and what's going to make us happy. that doesn't really correspond to reality or God's dream for us. And as I say, I think that's a temptation even more real now than ever before, when we live in a society which is constantly kind of saying, you create your identity, you can create your life. But I think part of our journey of following the Lord and living our vocation deeply is actually beginning to shed some of those ideas, actually letting them go, having the courage and the trust in God to let those ideas about who we are and what our lives must be like, and let those things go and place ourselves more wholly into his hands, and to trust that actually he's leading us to something so much greater than our own mediocre plans, our versions of ourselves and our fulfillment. When we put our trust in God and when we really begin to follow Jesus Christ, actually he gives us, he begins to reveal to us something which is just much more awesome, maybe also much more terrifying, but much more joyful than anything we would have come up with for ourselves. So I think there's one more quote. It's another Thomas Merton, who's good on this subject of desire and the true self. He said, every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, a false self. This is the man that I want myself to be, but who cannot exist, because God does not know anything about him. My false and private self is the one who wants to exist outside the reach of God's will and God's love, outside of reality and outside of life. And such a life cannot help but be an illusion. The secret of my identity is hidden in the love and mercy of God. Therefore, I cannot hope to find myself anywhere except in him. Therefore, there is only one problem on which all my existence, my peace and happiness depend: to discover myself in discovering God. If I find him, I will find myself. And if I find my true self, I will find him.